Hi, I'm Nathan Cole from Fatal Files, and today I'm walking you through pool-related incidents that, honestly, still catch me off guard with how quickly they turn deadly. From a father stepping into a packed wave pool to reach his daughter, to a rooftop party where a burning float turned a moment in the spotlight into something far worse. It was August 3rd, 2015, in Orlando, Florida. The heat was intense, and the wave pool was already crowded. People stood shoulder to shoulder as waves cycled continuously. The slick floor made footing unstable, and each surge pushed bodies together. With constant noise and movement, small problems were easy to miss. Derek Malone was 41, living in Kissimmee, running a small lawn care business that kept his life steady and predictable. He wasn't comfortable with crowds or busy water, but that day wasn't about him. It was about his daughters, 12-year-old Maya, who had been asking to go for months, and 10-year-old Brianna, who went along with her. After Maya brought home good grades, he finally agreed. His wife stayed home sick, so Derek took both girls himself, already set on one plan: stay near the edge, keep them in sight, and avoid going in. The wave pool was the main attraction, and it filled up fast, more crowded than Derek expected. People were already packed in, and once the waves started, there wasn't much room to move. Maya drifted closer to where the waves hit harder, and Brianna followed. Derek stayed near the edge, watching them. Then, Brianna slipped off her foam noodle. It's a small mistake, but Brianna panicked. Derek saw it immediately and stepped in without thinking. And honestly, I can't blame him. Most parents would have done the exact same thing. By the time he reached her, the water had already started pulling back for the next wave. People around him were shifting their feet, trying to stay balanced. He grabbed Brianna and pulled her in, trying to steady her. The first wave came through and pushed the crowd forward, not violent, but enough to throw people off. Derek tried to plant his feet, but someone bumped into his side and another leaned into his back. He adjusted, still holding Brianna, but he wasn't in control anymore. Every time he found his footing, another movement took it away, and the space around him kept tightening. Then, another wave followed. This time, a few people around him lost their balance. One person stumbled into him, and another grabbed onto his shoulder to stay upright. Derek dropped lower for a moment, then pushed himself back up. He was still standing, but it was becoming harder to stabilize. He tried to step back toward the edge, but there was no open space behind him. The crowd had closed in. Brianna was holding onto him tighter, which made it harder for him to adjust his balance. A stronger wave came through, and several people near him shifted at the same time. One person dropped lower and leaned forward. Another pressed in from the side. The pressure pushed Derek downward. He wasn't fully underwater, but he was bent and off balance. He tried to straighten up, but each attempt was interrupted by more movement around him. The pressure wasn't constant. It came in short bursts with each wave and each shift of people, but it was enough to disrupt his breathing. He could still breathe out, but pulling in a full breath became harder. He kept trying to regain control, small steps, slight adjustments, trying to stay upright while holding Brianna. But each time he stabilized, another movement pushed him off again. A witness, standing a few feet away later, said he looked like he was stuck in place, not moving with the rest of the crowd. Another described how people kept bumping into him as the waves came through, like he was trying to hold position while everyone else kept shifting around him. Then, he lost his footing. He dropped below shoulder level. Brianna slipped partially from his grip as someone else collided with them. His head went under briefly. When he came back up, it wasn't controlled. He was just trying to get air. Witnesses later said he stopped moving with the crowd. He looked more focused on staying upright than reacting to the waves. Another surge came through. This time, he went under again. Without a stable footing and already short on air, he didn't recover the same way. The crowd shifted away slightly, and he lost support. He went under and didn't come back up. At first, it wasn't obvious. From the outside, it looked like normal movement in a crowded pool. Then, people nearby noticed he wasn't resurfacing. Lifeguards were alerted and moved in. Brianna was pulled out first, then Derek was located just below the surface where the water had cleared. They brought him to the deck and started CPR immediately. Emergency services arrived shortly after. He was transported to the hospital, but the time without effective breathing had already caused critical damage. He was pronounced dead later that day. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as accidental drowning, with contributing factors from crowd density and repeated loss of footing during wave cycles. There was no single crushing force. Instead, it was a sequence of instability, restricted breathing, and submersion. Witness statements and staff reports were used to reconstruct the incident. The park confirmed it was operating within capacity limits, but the crowd density in the wave pool made movement difficult, especially during active cycles. After the incident, the facility reviewed its crowd control procedures, lifeguard positioning, and wave timing protocols to reduce similar risks. Brianna survived with minor water inhalation and shock. Maya was found nearby and was not physically injured. Their mother was informed later that day. And this case really sticks with me. There was nothing reckless about what he did. He made a split-second decision that almost any parent would make. But the next story starts just as small, over something most people wouldn't think twice about. It was June 14th, 2014, in Beaumont, Texas. A school pool sat open for an afternoon party, with students moving between the deck and the water. The deep end stayed quieter, with clear water, a visible bottom, and a few drains set into the floor beneath the surface. Standing beside the pool was Tessa Vargel, 19, a college student who wasn't part of the swim team. She only showed up that afternoon because her friend Dana invited her to the end-of-season party. It was one of those situations I've seen a lot, where everyone else already knows each other, and you kind of stay on the edge of things, just observing. That's exactly how Tessa was. She didn't plan on swimming, just stay a bit, support her friend, then leave. About 45 minutes in, she was near the deep end when one of her earrings came loose and dropped into the water. She watched it sink, settling near a floor drain at the bottom. Dana offered to grab it, but Tessa shook her head and said she'd get it herself. So she stepped in and moved toward the deeper section. On her first dive, she didn't reach it. When she came back up, she paused for a second, looking down again, like she was measuring it. The second time, she reached the bottom. She saw the earring, picked it up, and for a moment, everything was normal. As she turned to push back up, her hair drifted behind her. A few strands brushed against the drain cover. This time, the issue wasn't just wear. It was a loose section along the edge where the cover didn't sit flush. Small gaps had formed over time. When her hair touched it, the suction started pulling strands in, slowly at first, then tightening as more hair fed into the opening. I actually looked into this. Pool suction accidents happen more than people think, and they usually start the same way. A small contact that turns into something you can't break free from in time. By the time she reacted, the tension had already built. Several strands were caught deep enough that when she tried to move, they pulled her back down. She was held low, close to the pool floor. Her first instinct was to push upward, but the suction and the tension on her hair worked against her. The more she tried to lift, the tighter it pulled. She reached back, trying to free it with her hands, but she couldn't get the angle or force needed to undo it. Down there, everything is working against you. Your position, the pressure, the time. At the surface, nothing looked wrong at first. A few seconds passed. Dana kept watching the spot where Tessa had gone under. And you know that feeling. When something takes just a little too long, it stops feeling normal. Another student, Marcus, dove down to check. He reached her and tried pulling her up, but her body didn't move. He came back up for air, then went down again, this time trying to free her hair by hand. But he couldn't. The water near the drain had turned cloudy from the movement, and visibility was low. The hair was pulled into the gap and wrapped tight, and every attempt to pull her free only tightened it more. On the deck, people started shouting, trying to understand what was happening. Staff was alerted, and someone moved toward the emergency shutoff. But in the confusion and noise, it wasn't immediate. And honestly, that delay matters more than people think. By the time the system was shut down, too much time had passed. Once the suction stopped, they were able to free her by cutting sections of her hair. She was pulled out unresponsive. CPR started immediately, and emergency responders continued efforts on arrival, but the time without oxygen had already caused irreversible damage. She was pronounced dead shortly after. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as drowning due to mechanical entrapment from a defective drain cover. Not because she couldn't swim, but because she was physically held in place and couldn't surface. In the days after, witness statements and staff reports confirmed the drain had been flagged earlier that week for a loose section along its edge. It hadn't been repaired, and the pool remained open. The earring she went down for was recovered and later returned to her family. And the next case, feels completely different at first, but it follows that same pattern. Something small gets ignored, and one quick decision is all it takes. It was July 4th, 2016, in Dunwoody, Georgia. A backyard party was in full swing, with music playing, people talking, and a pool at the center of it all. The concrete around the water was wet from constant use, and groups of teenagers moved around the edge, laughing and filming each other. Caleb Runte was 20, tall and broad-shouldered, but quieter than people expected. He had stepped away from football and spent most of his time indoors, building keyboards and sticking to a small circle of friends. That night, he didn't go to the party because he liked parties. He went because Paige, 20, his crush, was going to be there. For most of the night, he stayed on the edges, talking a little, mostly watching. He had a couple of drinks, just enough to loosen up. Eventually, things shifted toward the pool. A group of guys started messing around, picking each other up and tossing each other in. It looked harmless. Kind of thing people do all the time. Caleb watched for a bit, then decided to join in. He told his friend Owen he was going to throw him in. Owen laughed and went along with it. Caleb noticed Paige nearby, watching, and committed. He stepped behind Owen, locked his arms under his shoulders, and lifted him in a bear hug. As he started walking toward the pool, he adjusted his grip once. Owen's weight shifted slightly, forcing Caleb to take a wider step to steady himself. It wasn't a big moment, but it was enough to throw off his balance just a little. The ground near the edge had been wet for hours. Water, sunscreen, constant foot traffic. It looked fine, but certain spots were slick. As Caleb reached the edge, his right foot slid. Both of his arms were occupied, holding Owen up, so he had no way to catch himself. His balance gave out, and he went backward hard. The back of his neck and shoulders struck the edge of the pool before he dropped into the water. He stayed conscious, which made it harder for anyone to recognize how serious the fall was. The impact caused a severe injury to his neck, affecting his spinal cord. Almost immediately, his body stopped responding the way it should. Movement below his neck became weak and uncoordinated. More importantly, his breathing was disrupted. He couldn't control it normally or take a full, steady breath. Owen surfaced right away, but Caleb didn't follow the same way. At first, people thought he was just stunned. He drifted up briefly, face up, then slowly rolled to the side. Witnesses said his eyes were open, but he wasn't reacting. He wasn't trying to stand or swim. His arms didn't move with purpose, and his body stayed mostly passive in the water. Caleb was still alive, but he had lost the control needed to keep himself upright. He couldn't lift his head properly or keep his airway clear. His breathing was shallow and irregular, and once water started getting into his mouth and nose, he couldn't correct it. And this is where the delay mattered. From the outside, it didn't look urgent right away. It looked like someone catching their breath after a fall, but those seconds passed and he didn't recover. By the time people realized something was wrong, he had already taken in water. A few people moved in and pulled him out with help from others nearby. CPR was started on the deck, and emergency services took over when they arrived. But the combination of the spinal injury and the time in the water was too much, and he was pronounced dead shortly after. The medical findings confirmed a cervical spinal injury from the impact, followed by drowning. The fall didn't kill him instantly. It took away his ability to move, stabilize himself, and even breathe properly in the water. And in a pool where everything else looked normal, that loss of control wasn't obvious right away. Witness accounts later showed how subtle it seemed at first. People thought he was just stunned, catching his breath after a bad fall. No one realized he couldn't lift himself, couldn't clear his airway, couldn't recover the way someone normally would. And situations like that don't always look dangerous right away. Sometimes they happen in places that feel completely familiar, like the next one. Before we continue, if you're into real stories like this, consider subscribing. More breakdowns like these coming up. It was July 4th, 2013, in Hilliard, Ohio. A backyard pool sat at the center of a busy family cookout, with people talking, music playing, and kids moving in and out of the water. The concrete deck was wet, the afternoon warm, and everything felt familiar, relaxed, and easy to move through. Lawrence Larry Metten was 67, a retired pipe fitter who had lived in the same house for over 30 years. Every summer, he hosted the same kind of gathering: family, neighbors, kids in and out of the pool, and he handled most of it. The grill, the setup, even the pool maintenance. And every time, it ended the same way. Larry climbing up and doing a cannonball off the diving board. It had become a tradition that people expected. That afternoon, the house was full again. People moving around, music playing, kids jumping in and out of the water. Larry stayed on the deck, talking, checking on things, having a couple of beers over a few hours. Nothing unusual. He was steady, aware, the same as always. The pool itself looked normal. The deep end still had enough depth for diving, just slightly lower than usual after recent work. It wasn't something that stood out in the moment, and throughout the day, people had been using it without any issue. By late afternoon, people started asking for the cannonball. At first, he brushed it off. Then more voices joined in. Kids started calling for it too. It turned into the same moment everyone was waiting for. Someone even set up a floating camera to record it, as they had in past summers. Eventually, Larry gave in. And honestly, at 67, it probably felt normal to him since he'd done it for years. But that's how you miss small changes. Eventually, Larry gave in. He climbed onto the diving board and went through the same routine. Light bounces, arms out, a short pause. From the outside, nothing looked different. But as he stepped into the jump, his timing was slightly off. Instead of extending just before impact like he usually did, he stayed more tucked than normal. He dropped into the water the way he had dozens of times before. But this time, a few things lined up differently, with the water sitting lower than usual, around 6.5 feet instead of closer to 8. There was less distance to absorb the fall. Staying tucked meant his body went deeper, faster, without spreading the impact. There was less margin than he was used to. He hit the bottom. The force traveled up through his lower back and spine. He didn't lose consciousness. He came back up to the surface, and at first it looked normal, a splash. Then he resurfaced, but within seconds, something was off. He wasn't moving the way he should. He stayed at the surface, but his body wasn't working with him. His legs didn't respond. He couldn't kick or push himself into a stable position. His movement was limited to his arms, and even that was uncoordinated. He tried to stay upright, but without control below his waist, his balance started to slip. He told his granddaughter to get her father, calm, direct. That part stands out because it meant he understood something was wrong before anyone else did. To the witnesses, it didn't look urgent yet. He was still above water, still conscious. People thought it was just a rough landing, but his breathing started to change. Without lower body control, he couldn't hold himself in place. His body slowly rotated, and each time his face dipped closer to the water, it took more effort to bring it back up. He tried to correct it using his arms, but it wasn't enough. Then, he couldn't correct it at all. His face went under, and without the ability to push himself back up, he started taking in water. That's when people realized something was wrong. Someone moved in and pulled him out with help from others nearby. CPR was started on the deck, and emergency services responded quickly. He was transported to the hospital, but he didn't survive. The medical findings confirmed a severe lower spinal injury from the impact, followed by drowning. The jump itself didn't kill him. It removed his ability to control his body in the water. What makes that one hard to process is how routine it felt. And the next case shifts to a completely different setting, but the pattern is still there. It was September 6th, 2015, in Las Vegas, Nevada. A rooftop pool party was in full swing, with music playing, drinks moving around, and people crowding the deck. Inflatable floats were scattered near the water, and small, open flames burned beside the seating area as the evening heat lingered. Preston Hayes was 20, college student who had just transferred that semester. He worked part-time to cover his expenses, balancing classes during the day and shifts at night. He wasn't naturally outgoing, and starting over meant he was still trying to find his place. Most of the time, he stayed on the edge of things, watching, listening, waiting for the right moment to step in. That night felt like one of those moments. He had been invited to a rooftop pool party by a few classmates, people he didn't know well yet but wanted to. And I get that situation. When you're new, you don't want to be the one standing back all night. You want to be part of it, even if it means pushing yourself a little. After a couple of drinks, he started opening up more, talking, laughing, moving between groups. Near the pool, a large inflatable float drifted along the edge, with people climbing on and off it. At one point, someone joked about who could stay balanced on it the longest. Preston laughed, hesitated for a second, then stepped forward and decided to try it. He climbed onto the float and lay back at first, then shifted to sit upright, adjusting his balance as it moved under him. And this is one of those things that looks easy until you're actually on it. Your center of gravity keeps shifting, and even small movements throw you off. For a few seconds, he held it. Then the float drifted slightly, and he adjusted again. His weight shifted to one side, and instead of correcting it, he overcompensated. It wasn't a big mistake, just a small one that kept building. Then he slipped. He didn't fall cleanly into the water. He went in sideways, off balance, without control over how he entered. When he came up, he was already disoriented, not injured, but not steady either. At first, it didn't look like a problem. People fall off floats all the time, but when he tried to stabilize himself, something was off. His movements didn't line up. The alcohol slowed his reactions just enough that he couldn't correct himself right away. Instead of getting upright, he stayed tilted, his body lagging what he was trying to do. He tried to move toward the edge, but his strokes weren't consistent. One arm would pull, then stop. His legs didn't kick in rhythm. His breathing started to break short, uneven pulls that didn't give him enough air. He wasn't panicking yet, but he also wasn't recovering. He dipped under for a second, came back up, then dipped again. Each time, it took more effort to get his face clear. From the outside, it still didn't look urgent. It looked like someone catching their breath after a fall. No one moved in right away, but his body was already falling out of sync. Each time his face went under, he took in a small amount of water. Not enough to trigger panic immediately, but enough to interrupt his breathing. When he came back up, he tried to inhale quickly, but that pulled more water in. His airway started to react. He coughed, but that only made him lose more control. Then his breathing broke completely. Instead of steady breaths, it turned into gasping. Short, ineffective attempts that didn't bring in enough air. His arms moved, but without coordination. His head dipped again, and this time, it stayed under longer. By the time he came back up, he wasn't in control anymore. His body started to sink between movements, his face slipping under without him being able to correct it. He was still conscious at first, but he couldn't keep his airway clear. Each attempt to breathe pulled in more water. The coughing stopped, not because he recovered, but because his body was shutting down. That's when it changed from a struggle to something quieter. Theo noticed first and moved toward him. By the time he reached him, Preston wasn't responding normally. Others stepped in to help pull him out of the water and onto the deck. CPR started immediately. Emergency services followed, but too much time had already passed. He was later pronounced dead. The medical findings confirmed drowning, with alcohol impairment as a contributing factor. There were no major injuries from the fall. What happened was simpler and harder to see.